I just wanted to do a quick piece on the two debates that Sargon had with the Woolly Bumblebee and all of those guys about Sargon's new petition. I personally support his petition because, well, I guess I'll give you an example of why I think it would be correct along the same lines that they did theirs. So a lot of the examples they used were like, in hard science this would not be acceptable, and since this is purporting to be factual, as it was like a science or a social science, therefore, it should not be able to purport itself to be factual if it is not factually correct. This is true, and I agree. And so, I would just like to give you an example. This example is like if you had, let's say, in a differential equations class, some professor had come up with a new way of evaluating differential equations. Let's say it was much easier than any other method that was currently being taught. What you probably wouldn't do is you would not get rid of all of the other methods and no longer teach them. A lot of times when a new method is discovered, you keep it in along with all of the other methods, and eventually you phase the older methods out if there's no reason to use them. But sometimes a newer method might be invented that's simpler but can only be used in a certain case. And I'm not going to get into specifics because I don't need my viewers to understand differential equations, but essentially, there's many ways to evaluate them, and some are much easier and much simpler than others. If you had a very simple way, but only worked for very few cases, you would still teach it because when those cases came up, it could save you a lot of time. And so, that's what I would assume you would do with this, is let's say in your social justice course that you had, I don't know, you had some opinion, like 1 in 5. Then what you would do and instead of after that, you would say this was the prevailing theory, however, this has later been debunked, and more accurate statistics are here. However, these historical figures were used to base these presuppositions on. And then you can have the discussion whether or not the presuppositions are still valid with the new statistic. You could keep most of the material the same, honestly, only you would have to reevaluate you would have to actually have a discussion and reevaluate whether or not the conclusions are valid now that the premises are different. So let's say if the wage gap, let's say a lot of times it gets reduced to about 4% or something when most easily quantifiable factors are taken into play. So then, now you take this and you say, is there still something that needs to be done? You reevaluate it with this new premise. You could even come to the same conclusion that yes, 4% is unacceptable. If, there must be a way that we can make this 0%. You could come to the same conclusion. But you might also come to the conclusion now that's been reevaluated that actually 4% is acceptable. Especially if it's lower. Let's say if it was 1%, a lot of people would probably go, you know what, that's probably acceptable. You're probably not going to get a whole lot of closer. It would be very hard to get closer. It's the same thing. It's kind of like the losing weight thing. It's really easy to lose, the first bit of weight, but eventually as you get closer, you realize that it's kind of starts leveling off, and it gets quite difficult. And that's how I would presume it would be with something like a wage gap. Is you can, if there was something truly wrong, let's say it was all sexism, and you fixed all the sexism, somehow I still doubt it would be 0%. It would always probably be 1% to maybe 0.5%. There's always going to be it, because even just on a given year, because you're taking an aggregate of individuals, if there happens to be one more woman that is a CEO or something because there's an odd number, throws everything out of proportion or something like that. So when you have something like that, you have to realize that you can go back and edit the premises, and you can still demonstrate that with the old premises, you would come to this conclusion, and that might be a valid conclusion to come through with those old premises, and you can show that that is true, and you can show with the new premises. Now you can have, in your class, you can have a discussion whether or not the new premises validate the old conclusion. And that's actually something that could be quite constructive. And I think that that's why this is a good idea. But instead, you have somebody like the Woolly Bumblebee, well, actually Joe from, Mr. Woolly Bumblebee, saying Newtonian physics is false, and I'm just like face palmed. I wanted to fall on my sword at that point. Like, didn't somebody prove Newtonian physics false? And it's like, if you actually knew anything about Newtonian physics, you would know that it's almost always true. It just falls apart when you get to the quantum level, and it falls apart as you reach the speed of light. Both things that have various reasons for them because as you approach the speed of light, your mass starts to become infinite, and infinite mass kind of fucks with momentum and shit like that. Because you have infinite mass, then you would have infinite momentum, therefore it would never stop. And then like you get shit like that, and yeah, it gets confusing. And so someone who has such a like pathetic level of understanding of science is trying to like understand these allegories that like Sargon is using to physics. Honestly, I think it probably would have been helpful if Sargon had picked uh, any other subject other than physics, because it seems like Mr. Woolly Bumblebee doesn't know what physics is at all, or how to do it, or what does it entail. He's one of those. He could honestly be one of those creationists that think creation isn't. It must be true because the second law of thermodynamics can't be valid with evolution or whatever. And just like, no, you're wrong. Doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So here's the thing with people like that is there's no point in arguing with someone that's so dumb that they don't think that physics is an accurate subject. And then he later tried to correct himself, and then they had to have everyone correct him because he doesn't actually know shit about shit. But he's purporting to know it. He's Dunning-Kruger effect, max level. Just I heard Newtonian physics is incorrect somewhere. It's like is incorrect at certain positions, and of course nobody in the stream is like that good at physics or anything, or happen to know that. So I kind of wish I was in the chat at the time, but I don't remember when the stream was held. I think it was kind of at a weird time, like either early in the morning or late at night or something. And so you're arguing with somebody that doesn't understand things, and you know it's like, oh, I was a professor and I had to do all these things. You know what? It's okay. All the students are critical thinkers. It's like that's not your own professorial bias coming through. I know a lot of students, like me, for example. Like when I go to differential equations, I write what's on the fucking board. I will notice sometimes that there's an incorrect arithmetic thing, and somebody will usually point it out. But sometimes I just write it down, and I'm not sure if I should ask the question whether or not it's incorrect, because I trust the professor to know what the fuck he's doing. And so, if I was, let's say, to go to a gender studies course or whatever, I would still write down everything they told me. And it's been quite commonly said that when you just write things down, you tend to remember them and learn them, by simply writing it down. And so, you could even be subtly, and I notice subtle things, like when people subtly point out, like, oh, this is true, or that's a microaggression. Like my communications class, we went over microaggressions, and I was like laughing my ass off the whole time because it's just like this is absolutely absurd. Like people can ask me where I'm from. I'm not from around here. I'm not from outside the United States, but I talk a little bit differently than a lot of people here, and I have different mannerisms because I'm from the Midwest, not from the East Coast where I go to school. And it's like things like I've never eaten at a Chick-fil-A, and people are like, how have you never eaten at a Chick-fil-A? It's like I just don't really have them where I grew up. Like you'd have to like drive somewhere to find it. You'd have to drive to a city to find it. So it's just like some subtle things like that. That you just you're a little bit of always a little bit of an outsider, and people could ask where I'm from. I wouldn't be like, how dare you ask where I'm from? Or like if I went to like well, actually, if you go to a lot of foreign countries, people usually know if you're American or not. Usually pretty obvious. American tourists are kind of obnoxious. But let's say I did go to a foreign country and they didn't know where I was from. Let's say I went to Seoul or something to go teach engineering or something. Let's say I get a PhD and I go teach engineering. People ask where I'm from, and so like people will teach this microaggression shit as if it's fact, and you have to write it down. It's gonna be on your exam, and if you say this is factually incorrect on your exam, guess what? You get a 0 on that question. So people have to answer it, and you're assuming that every single college student has the mental fortitude to go that this is factually incorrect, and I know it's incorrect, in my heart, or in my mind, I guess, but deep down, I know it's incorrect, but I'm just gonna do it anyway because I want the credit. You're assuming that every student can separate that thing indefinitely, that you can have all these ideas around you and you can just perfectly insulate yourself from all of them. It's an absolutely ridiculous assumption that every single student is good enough to do that. I mean, you're not even smart enough to understand Newtonian physics, so how do you even understand How do you expect any of these students can like do it? I mean, you're like, well, I got through it, and well, I'm actually just so dumb that it probably went right over my head. Like, the thing is people that are smart tend to learn things really fast, which means the smart people, if they don't have a strong force of will, can be indoctrinated pretty quickly. And when they're indoctrinated quickly, they a lot of times become very good at indoctrinating other people because they're smart and can make eloquent arguments. And so it can be quite dangerous to make a class of the smartest people believing the most dangerous ideology. You're essentially doing the same thing as like if you had let's say you had all of the world leaders became indoctrinated in some hideous ideology where you were going to commit genocide. It'd be very hard to stop because a lot of world leaders, especially dictators, can be very clever, and a lot of the people that are going to be on their staff are going to be some of the best and the brightest. And so, if you had all of these people believing in this thing, a lot of times it can be hard to stop because there might not be a lot of smart people left that go, hey, this is wrong. So it can be quite dangerous to just allow ideologies to fester. And while in principle I would be against ever like saying you can't say that, you can't do that, but the thing is teaching it is different. And there's this weird there's this weird equation that's just fundamentally incorrect where you cannot equate teaching and saying. Because to say to someone, I believe that 1 in 5 women get raped, is not going to indoctrinate anyone. But when you have an institution that is saying that, that can indoctrinate people. If you know anything about indoctrination, you know that in the Second World, during the Cold War, a lot of times the indoctrination might not be successful on everybody, but you use peer pressure and secret police to make sure everyone acts as if they're indoctrinated anyways. So yes, even though I will never be indoctrinated by this stuff, if you had everyone around me to be, then I would probably go along with it because I value my life a little bit more than that. I might be one of the first people to jump ship though when things are going wrong and go join whatever resistance or whatever side if I got the chance. But at the same time, while living under the tyrannical rule, I would still be with I would still act as if I was indoctrinated. Because this fundamental misunderstanding that if you get rid of a course that you were censoring the professor is ridiculous. Courses are gotten rid of all the times because they're not necessary. They teach things that aren't useful. The graduation requirements change for a certain thing and there's no longer enough students to take it. Let's say if chemical engineering decided that actually we really don't need to take organic chemistry too. Let's just say we don't have to take Orgo 2. And eventually, if only chem majors had to take it, you would see a drastic reduction in the amount of professors teaching it and the amount of sections open. Because if the less people that have to take the course, the less sections they're going to have. It's just common sense. And eventually what can happen is if you had a class that didn't have anyone that actually was required to take it and nobody was really interested in it, it goes away. And I understand that that might be the method of which they would want gender studies to go away, but it doesn't work like that because people will always be interested in it. Because at least at the base level, maybe the higher level classes will go away, and maybe it would become small enough where it can only be a minor, but it will never die. It's just like as long as there's people that are interested, they'll always keep it alive. But what you can do is removing a course does not mean necessarily you're censoring the professor. Sometimes courses just get removed because there's no interest. And sometimes there is a need to remove courses because they're no longer applicable to the real world. If I was forced to take an engineering course that actually was in a subject completely unrelated to any real world field of study, I bet the engineering department would eventually get rid of it. Now, they might not get rid of it the day it becomes relevant, because there's a lot of people that they planned to have to take it. So a lot of times, if you're already in college, you still have to take it, or to a certain point, because there's people that they plan their schedule around having to take this course and having when you take that course you'll have enough credits to graduate kind of thing, or you'll have this certain GPA in your major when you take this course, and then stuff like that, assuming grade you're going to get in it. So when you do things like that, sometimes you screw people up. So, what you can easily do is you can easily suspend the course for a year because you can just change when people have to take it. And what you could even do is you could probably change it over the summer. What you would have to do is when you go to register for college courses, you pick online what courses you want to take, and then you have to talk to your advisor. And these are the courses I'm going to take, and all that. And so when you register courses, you could just have a lot of the information in this course may be subject to change as per last year. All you have to put for a warning is so if your friends told you about this class what it was like last year, it might not be the same. Then over the summer, because it really doesn't take that long to edit a course, like if it's a 1 semester course, it's only about 4 months long, so you have 3 months to edit the course. Pretty easy to do. And so you can edit all that, draw up all new lesson plans, put all your asterisks in, put all your footnotes, like the Mein Kampf example, you just put the footnote in. Say, this premise is not actually valid, but you know what? Here's what they believed, and this is the conclusion they drew it from. If this is actually what's true, what conclusion do you draw? And stuff like that, it's not that hard to do. And it would be completely successful. And now I want to address the thing is this petition was never about actually enacting this change. This change would be impossible to enact because there would be so much social pressure against it and so much pressure, especially out of academia, to have them essentially have to work over the summer unpaid to fix their course because it's garbage. Maybe you could pay them. I don't know. You would have to work out the numbers on that because obviously colleges are definitely not going to take millions of dollars to have to pay professors over this like like maybe 100 professors over the summer to change all their courses. That's definitely not going to happen. But what you can easily do is put the pressure to say that we like as you know the group of people that are trying to be educated and are educated say that this is no longer acceptable and you need to do something about it or we will stop giving you our services and we encourage nobody to take these courses because they're disgusting and as a university that teaches them you are also disgusting. You can put this kind of pressure on universities. Just look what happened to Mizzou. Nobody's going there anymore. They just saw that this place is just a madhouse, and they're just like, actually, no, I'm not gonna register here. I'm not gonna attend classes here. I'm gonna go somewhere else. I'm gonna leave, or I'm gonna, they had like 30% less freshmen enroll, and all of a sudden they're in huge money problems because you kind of bank on getting like students to go to your college to pay for it, and yeah, nobody went. So yeah, so you can put that kind of pressure on, and that's the whole point is to apply pressure. And the petition, if it was to go through, would actually do something that they want, like Sargon wants to do, which is also fine. You should never obviously plan something that you don't mean in case it passes. That would be disaster. Like if you were actually pro-life and you created like a pro-choice petition to demonstrate something and it actually passed, you'd be pretty sad. So what you do is you create a petition that has a position, but you know that it's probably not achievable. But if it does get achieved, you'd still be happy. Then you'd be overjoyed. But you realistically expect that nothing will happen. Kind of like the Death Star petition to the White House. They weren't actually going to build one. Like, of course, but it was the thought that counted. But so yeah, you have a bunch of disingenuous people. They're just saying that Sargon is disingenuous because they think that they know better because they went to college one time and he went to college earlier than they did. And therefore, he's wrong because these courses didn't exist when he went to college and he's not taken them. Even though he's researched them, his research cannot be good as their anecdote because reasons. Their whole argument boils down to you're incorrect because reasons. They don't ever state them when they get pressed on defining their terms. They say that he actually didn't define his terms as the two quote going, haha, but you didn't do it either. It's like, yeah, but I asked you a question and you just dodged it. And then he's like, actually, you dodged the question. And it's just like face palm, disingenuous. And then they go into the comments and they say, yeah, you can unsubscribe. We don't care what you think and stuff like that. Instead of being like taking the social pressure and being like, actually, we were wrong, guys, and we're sorry about that, but and here's how we're gonna make our channel better. No, they instead answered all their criticism with just being like petulant little children and being like, "Oh, actually, you're wrong," and the entirety of their title being something as ridiculous as Sargon of Akkad wants censorship with Sargon and V, and at first not even representing their opinions, just having them strawman their opinions and then knock it down. And finally, when they get Sargon and V on, and they just are just obnoxious to V until he leaves, and then Sargon is just gonna stick around because you know it's it you never want people to be able to just misrepresent you. And if you're there, you can stop them from misrepresenting you. Be like, especially to the chat, and just be like, actually, this is false. And then they would have to actually combat you. Whereas instead, if you're not there, they can just make shit up about what you think, and there's no one there to defend you other than people that might subscribe to you. And what they're gonna do is then they're just gonna call you, oh look at the fanboys. That's their argument. Their argument is that no one can be correct if they follow someone that they don't like. That's like saying if I was subscribed to Kevin Logan, I can no longer be correct about things that I think Kevin Logan is incorrect about. Like, what? That doesn't even make any sense. And actually, I thought Kevin Logan in these debates, shout out to Kevin Logan, because usually you, he gets kind of a bad rap because he can be a little bit hyperbolic and he can be a little bit overly emotional, especially in some of his older stuff. And he can be a little bit of name calling, a little petulant stuff. But actually, I think his opinions were probably some of the most correct in this debate because I think that he just fundamentally disagreed with the way that Sargon was doing it, but I think he agreed with all the motivations. I think he just thought that there might be a better way, and he didn't know what it was. And so I think that's very good, and I think that is legitimate criticism of Sargon's thing to say that I don't think this is the best method, and that's fair. It's a lot better than you're wrong because reasons. And I just think that the Woolly Bumblebee might have been the most disgusting debaters I'd ever seen. Just shouting over Sargon to complain about him shouting over them. It's just like, what? Ridiculous. And just saying such nonsense as Newtonian physics is incorrect with no knowledge of the subject at all. And then people like trying to explain it, and then he's like, actually, like, he realizes he doesn't know anything about it, and this is a terrible example, and he was like trying to like draw some weird parallel, but he actually realizes that he like has gone out of the scope of his own knowledge because he actually has the Dunning-Kruger effect in full force the entire time. And so he's like, aha, but this, he was gonna try to make the point, aha, but since this is incorrect and it's still taught, you want to ban physics. And everyone just kind of like stopped and was like, you just said physics is factually incorrect. Like, he actually said physics is factually incorrect. And people are just like dumbfounded about how fucking dumb you can be to say that physics is factually incorrect. Now, a lot of things in physics may be approximations. Like, Newtonian physics for some things are actually approximations. And especially Newtonian physics you might learn in like entry level college, like physics I've taken is, ignore air resistance, ignore friction, ignore drag, all this stuff. But eventually you get high enough level of physics, you just do that too. And Newtonian physics becomes closer and closer approximation the more things you take into account like that until it is accurate. And it's kind of like the, ideal gas law kind of stuff, where it must be ideal in order for this to be correct. Well, no such situation exists that's really ideal, but a lot of situations exist where it is close enough to ideal that this is correct. And there are also situations where it is not ideal, therefore it's not correct, but that does not make the whole thing incorrect. And, and that's why sometimes you have to learn other things that are actually more correct at the other points, but are harder to use, or might require lots of things you might have to look up. Instead of things that can be easily measured, you might have to go buy like some 1,500 page handbook like the one we have for chemical engineering that you just have to look up values in. Just thousands of pages of tables. Just look up the value you're looking for. And the fact that like you would say so disingenuously that this makes it incorrect just shows a lack of knowledge about anything. And and just the anger and the shouting is just so disgusting. Like there's no need to shout at your opposition. Now I get kind of heated, and sometimes I do it too, but it's because I get passionate. Like oh, my face will get sweaty and stuff, because I'm like really into it and stuff like that. I'll raise my voice because like I'm really passionate about it. But I'm never doing it like in the tactic that it's obvious he's doing, where he's trying to shout down his opponent. I'm never just trying to be louder than them and not let a word in, but I'm trying to like get all my points out and lay it all out and like show the logical step. And sometimes I get flustered because I'm just the kind of person that gets flustered with that kind of thing. And sometimes, yeah, I do get angry and get a little bit mad about the opposition if they're being stubborn, but it's never enough. It's one thing to be mad and angry and flustered, and you need to calm down, and another to be trying to use your anger and bullying tactics to silence your opposition. I don't think I've ever tried to, and if I have, in the past, I'm sure someone would be able to be like, actually, you've done that in the past, like somebody that knows me, and be like, okay, yeah, well, I apologize for that, because I would never try and go for an argument where I'm just trying to stump my opposition by shouting at them. The best thing to do when you're having a debate is not to shout at your opposition, it's to demonstrate why they're incorrect, or to demonstrate why you're correct, or both. Because you can have a debate where your opponent is not incorrect, but you may be more correct. Like, let's say they think that, let's say it's Trump, and he says that building a wall is what's going to make this country great again, whatever. And you say, actually, I think there's a lot of different ways we can do this, and here's why, and if they're demonstrably better, then you would win the debate. But that doesn't mean that his idea wouldn't work, necessarily. Or you can go the route of saying, actually, here's why this wouldn't be beneficial. But when you do that, you also need to then give an alternative. Unless the alternative is, of course, things being the same way. Because if something is like maybe only marginally beneficial, then you have to say why something would be better than that. And sometimes it might be that the status quo is actually better. But you have to make the argument for why it's better. You cannot just say that your opponent is wrong without saying why there's something, without giving a contrary thing and still have it be a productive discussion. You can never just say, I think that dyeing your hair makes you look unattractive without saying, because this makes you look more attractive. Because otherwise, all you're doing is insulting the person for a choice they make. Instead, what you can do is say that I think it would look more attractive if you were to do it this way. And you can actually make something, while you're being critical of someone, you can still give them a compliment, and you can still be nice to your opposition, and you can still be charitable. That was the other thing about what Joe was doing, is he was being the opposite of charitable. He wouldn't give, like, when Sargon would make, like, a mistake with his words, he would not let him just, like, I know what you mean, let's keep going at the discussion at hand. He would latch on to these weird pedantic things. And then he would say, ah, see, you're being pedantic to Sargon. And then, like, but you're being pedantic. And the other thing he would do is he would take everything that Sargon was saying to the absolute extreme. He's like, so if you're saying this, then we should. He like with the physics thing. He's trying to say, well, if you're saying we shouldn't teach things that are factually inaccurate, we should ban literature. We should ban, all these things. It's like that's not what he's saying, and that's not even the logical extreme. He's like, well, we should ban things that are factually inaccurate, and then Sargon had to keep saying the entire time, we should ban things that purport to be, or we should change things that purport to be accurate that are not accurate. We should either make them say these are not accurate, or we should, and we might have to suspend them while we do that because it takes time to say that these are not accurate. You can't just like, aha, all inaccurate, ban the whole course, and that's not what he's proposing either. So this weird thing where he's like trying to take everything to the extreme to make it sound ridiculous isn't a fair representation of what he's trying to do, because he knows that the only way that he can invalidate the argument is by making it as extremist sounding as possible. To ban all art and literature would be absolutely ridiculous, of course, but that's not what he's advocating for. But that is what Joe needed Sargon's position to be in order to beat it. And so he kept using this, and I want to say straw man because it's not
a complete mischaracterization. It's more of taking the argument to an extreme that the proponent of the argument does not advocate for, and no logical person would actually think that that would ever come about. It was more like a slippery slope, honestly. It was the whole argument was saying if you can do this, therefore this will happen, without any proof. Like if you think that we can just ban social justice, that therefore we can just therefore all opposition to this you can just censor them, destroy all their courses, and get them all out of university and fire every professor you want. Absolutely ridiculous mischaracterization, and I was just disgusted. I watched both streams, and I didn't watch the beginning part where they were just in their echo chamber because I just knew that from the especially from the way they were talking because it was after the other one. I just knew from the way they were talking that it was just absolute pedantic bullshit and just absolute like and someone even made the pigeon comparison where there's no point in playing chess with a pigeon when they just knock over the piece of shit all over the board and then strut back to the flock telling about how much they won. That's basically what they did. And so they went on Sargon's stream, got destroyed, then they just kicked all over the pieces, shit everywhere, and then it went back to their own stream to tell about how much better they were than the other people. And then they get Sargon and V back, they shout them down until V is just like, this is unproductive. And then Sargon is just like left alone with, I think there's one or two other people that like support him, and they're just all trying to shout him down, and they're all just, Joe is just being belligerent. I mean, I could swear the guy was fucking drunk. Like, it, the guy had to have been like, super drunk or something. There's no way, like, to make a ridiculous claim to say it's physics is factually inaccurate is just disgusting. Like, honestly, no one should subscribe to this channel, and not because I think that they need to be like punished for this. It's just if this is a level of logic, I don't think anyone that supports me should support them because no one should support somebody that is just so disgustingly disingenuous in a debate to somebody else. And that's why I always try and be charitable when I'm debating with someone. I give them things because sometimes what you can do, and it can be even more powerful than being not charitable, is to be charitable and still wreck them. Because, like, sometimes you have to give somebody something. Like, let's say you give a feminist the wage gap. You can still say that their actions are not going to be effective, even if it is true, that their position is still wrong. And that can be even more powerful when then you say, and your premise isn't even correct. And to just summarize everything, you should never be so disingenuous to just say things that are wrong, to try and equate them to opponent's position that's an extreme of the position they hold. Because there's no point in doing that. It doesn't prove you're correct. And even if it proves them wrong, you don't have anything that's right. So all you're doing is saying, well, you did the math wrong, but I can't do math either. And thank you for listening.